Chairman Poitras?
Yes.
Ready.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to a regular meeting of the Madera County Board of Supervisors, November 17, 2020. And let's go ahead with a roll call of our supervisors.
Supervisor Wheeler? Supervisor Wheeler?
Yes.
Supervisor Frazier?
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers? Supervisor Rodriguez?
Yep.
Chairman Poitras?
Yes. Thank you so much. Are there any additions to the agenda? If not, the following items will be discussed on a non-appointment basis, not necessarily in order listed. Scott, would you read out those items?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Two items on this morning's closed session. First item is request for closed session, Government Code Section 54957.6. This conference with labor negotiators, the agency designated representatives are Elba Gomez, Director of HR, and Susan Carter, also from the HR department. All employee units are up for discussion today. And item number two, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation, deciding whether to initiate litigation pursuant to subsection D4 of Government Code Section 54956.9, and there's one case up for discussion this morning.
Very good, thank you. And are there any members of the public who wish to comment on these items? If not, we will retire into closed session. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to a regular meeting of the Madera County Board of Supervisors, Tuesday, November 17, 2020. And since my colleagues are all remote, we will call for a roll call to make sure that they're with us.
Supervisor Wheeler?
There's his picture.
He might be muted.
That's his screen. Unless he's hiding under the desk. Maybe that's what he's doing. This is why we do a roll call.
Sorry.
Supervisor Wheeler?
Hello.
Supervisor Frazier?
Here.
Supervisor Rogers?
Here.
Supervisor Rodriguez?
Here.
Back to Supervisor Wheeler? Supervisor Wheeler,
Here.
Chairman Poitras.
Here. Well, very good. We're all here and active and participating. So, Council, would you report out of closed session?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No action on this morning's closed session items.
Very good. Thank you very much. We'll move to the part of the meeting where we open and close the meeting in memory of. And do my colleagues have anybody they'd like to open and close the meeting in memory of?
I do, Supervisor Poitras. I wanted to open and close today's meeting in memory of Sherry Daggett. A lot of you may know her, longtime Madeiran, married to Ron Daggett, her son John Daggett. You can see his name all over signs, but just wonderful people, a great family, and she'll be dearly missed. She was a elementary school teacher, just always had a smile, always happy, and did a lot for the community. And I remember growing up and great friends with my parents, and just be sad to not see her around anymore.
Was that Ron's wife?
Yes.
Yeah, I knew him pretty good. They done a couple of projects for Wiley and I up in Norfolk, the architectural work on them. She was really nice. One time he designed the shopping center there in Norfolk, and I complained to him about it. He didn't put enough overhang for the snow, and it was dropping, building snow up on the walkway. So she came up with him on a Saturday to meet with Wiley and I, and she said, "Ron, I would give you any idea of doing that like that. I can't believe you did that, Ron." Right in front of him, and I thought, it was so funny. Poor Ron.
That was Sherry. That was, yeah. But
I have one to get done, so.
Okay.
so that was it. But that's why you don't have Flatlanders come up there, huh, Tom?
Yeah, I know. It was so funny though. I felt sorry for him. I mean, because she really laid into it. Ron. But anyway, the other one I have is Tom Hebard. We all went to school together up here, all through school. I think he was born and raised here, him and his sister. And he passed away actually the end of May. I just found out about this weekend. He worked for PG&E until he retired about probably 15 years ago. And then he got Alzheimer's, and he'd been in really bad shape for a while. But he passed away. He'll be a lot better now and not suffering at all. So he's a great friend. He used to run the car show for the Norfolk Boosters to raise money for the Norfolk Recreation Center every year. He actually started it through PG&E, and they sponsored it. And at every car show, PG&E would buy tons of shrimp for the lunch, and it was always free, so it was kind of cool. But then it got too big, and they couldn't do it, so it was more localized then. Anyway, he's going to be really missed. His parents were great people up here too, so they all worked for PG&E. His family, always long time. So,
All right.
Anyway.
Thank you, gentlemen, for those memories. We'll move on to our invocation and pledge of allegiance. We have Pastor James Kendall of Grace Community Church who will lead us in the invocation, and I'd like to ask our District Attorney, Sally Marino, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody stand.
Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for your love for us, Lord, that we know from your word that you loved us as your enemies, Father, so much that you sent your Son to die on the cross for our sins, Lord. And I just thank you for the encouragement that is, even in tough times, Lord, even in dark times as we're living through as a world right now, Lord, that we know that you're still in control and we know that you still love us. We thank you for the opportunity to come here, Lord. We thank you for those who serve us diligently day in and day out to protect us, to help our county, Lord, become better and to grow, and to take care of people, Lord, who fight for us daily, and we thank you for them. And so we ask that you would provide them with good health. We ask that you would give them wisdom, today and every day, Lord, in the decisions they make, that you would show them the way, to show them the way to lead, show them the way to serve, Lord, so that this county can prosper and grow and do great things, Lord. We just love you, and we thank you for your son, Jesus. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Let's place our hands on our heart. If you're a prior service member, I'd ask you in accordance with duty and regulation, render the proper. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible.
I couldn't hear her, so I don't know if it was muted or what.
Okay, we have public comment. The first 15 minutes of each regular session are set aside for members of the public to address the board on any matter under the jurisdiction of the board, but not appearing on the agenda. The board will not take action on any items presented under public comment. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Anyone addressing the board is asked to print their names clearly on the speaker sheet at the podium and state their names and county of residence for the record. I believe that we have others that might be here this morning, but also we have Madeline Harris on the line. Or did she submit a statement?
Hi, good morning, supervisors. I'm here on the line, and I actually wanted to provide a comment on, I believe it's item 8A, so it is appearing on the agenda.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a public comment at this time? If not, we'll move on to the...
I got one, Rob.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to announce I have a town hall this Thursday at 6 to 8. Thursday the 19th, it's a Zoom meeting. And if they want to get on it, they can text me or Bobby, and we can send them the Zoom address, or I posted it all over Facebook too, so they can find it on there. So that'll be this Thursday. And we've got Consumer Protection, California Department of Insurance is going to be there. American Forest, Brittany Dyer, Coastal Resource Conservation District, Firewise Communities, Madera County Veterans Affairs, Josh Christopherson, Public Health, Sarah Boss, Visitor Bureau, Rhonda Salisbury, Sierra National Forest, Denise told me about the Creek Fire, and the board's Bobby McCauley is going to represent the Board of Supervisors on the Creek Fire resources that we have. So it's going to be very interesting and very informative. So thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for coordinating that, Tom. You always do a great job with the town halls, and they're always very educational.
Yeah, I also have my coffee and conversation tomorrow morning as well at 8:30. It's also posted all over Facebook, and anybody who wants information on that can get a hold of me or Melissa.
And you'll home deliver the coffee to people that are participating on Zoom, or they'll make their own coffee. Bring your own coffee.
Yeah, it's BYOC.
There you go. Outstanding. Perfect. Let's move on to the consent calendar. Are there any items on the consent calendar that a supervisor would like to have pulled for further comment?
I have one. I just want to say a plus on item E, and then item F, and item J.
Okay, item E.
Item E. Turned it over and got the wrong paper here. The item E, consider the grant agreement with CAL FIRE. I just wanted to thank everybody who participated in that. Those safety items, the radios and those pants, I think going to be a great addition to our volunteers and stuff. It just shows how we're trying to recruit and keep our volunteer firemen going. So thank you, Matt Watson, for getting that grant. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure they will too. And something, especially we have fires like we've had the last couple of years. Then item F, Let's see, transfer. Oh, how did that lift get damaged? It was there was the lift they got to replace, and I don't know if Steve's there or not, or somebody.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
There we go. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, we had a truck up on the lift, and we had one of those earthquakes happen in the mountains. Shook us a little bit, and it sprung it on the lift. Well, it checked out pretty good, but the bushing started to wear in the carrier, and it's got to the point where it needs to be replaced because no welders will try and repair the bushings and certify it for us. So it kind of left us, we have to get a new lift.
Okay, I can understand that. We had one on the ranch, so I know what you mean, buddy. So
Okay, very good. Thank you. And item J.
yeah, item J. I'd just like to know, if we spend a lot of money on this homeless, and I'd like to know what are some of the results. Have we helped any of them this year since we got that grant December 19th and we approved it in February this year? I'm just wondering how many homeless we've helped that have done anything with them. I'd like to have maybe we can do a report on it next time or something if they have no answers right now. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Supervisor Wheeler, Steve Duckworth, the Deputy Director of Social Services. We do have our outcomes thus far for this grant project. We've enrolled 117 people in Medi-Cal for the very first time. We retained or assisted 98 others to maintain their Medi-Cal eligibility. We are doing outreach for the homeless and other populations throughout the county, including up in Eastern Monroe County. If you want more specific information, we'll be glad to provide it, but that's the general data I have.
No, that's great. I like that. 117 first timers, that's to me is amazing. That's a big hit. So, and keeping 98 of them still working, getting their services. Thank you. That's all I want to do. I wanted to kind of brag about it, but I wanted to make sure we could. So
Thank you.
those numbers sound really good. Thank you, Chairman.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any other comments from the supervisors? If not, are there any members of the public who wish to comment on consent calendar items?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote.
Supervisor Wheeler,
Yes.
Supervisor Frazier,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Supervisor Rodriguez, Supervisor Rodriguez, Chairman
Not
Porter.
muted.
He said yes. I think it was just right when it was coming up.
Yes. Rodriguez, yes.
Chairman Portres,
Yes.
vote passes 5-0.
Thank you. Discussion items. Item 6A, the Behavioral Health Department. Mr. Cook.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor Poitras and other supervisors on the call. So this item is coming back. This was the item that we had last week, that there was questions about the budget, rightfully so, and I did not have sufficient answers to that or understanding of it. And so clearly at that time, the direction was a couple things. One, to clarify in the budget so that it makes sense to the public and to the Board of Supervisors. And second was to assure that the COLAs or the cost of living allowances given to the staff for this provider is in step with county employees. And I have to say, I really appreciate that direction. I think it shows the public, I know the board already thinks so highly of their staff, but to show that that our contracted providers are in step with what our county employees are receiving. And we did that. We went back. And first of all, the original budget that was submitted, the challenge with that budget is it had some changes, like one staff went from 0.8 to 1 FTE. Two other staff were grouped together that went from 1.8 to 2, and the narrative did not reflect that so well. Also on the budget, on the current year, it showed, or the prior year, last year, it shows actuals as opposed to budget. So when you put those two into place, that actually show real budgeted numbers, not actual that were invoiced, because the invoice is quite low. Then the change year to year was not very dramatic. What they had in their budget was a 3% COLA each year. We went back to that provider and said, you can for last year, because county employees received a 3% COLA, but for the next year, it has to be 0%, and they agreed to that. And then we put that in the budget and it's reflected in their contract.
Very good. Are there any questions of Dennis? Or this
No, I just,
Chairman?
that explained it pretty good. I just didn't quite understand those big jumps, so it makes it a lot better when you know exactly how it happened and why it happened.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
May I speak?
Supervisor. Yes.
Okay, Dennis,
Yes, sir.
Fresno, they have a commission that's been studying the problem with the 911 calls, and the police go out and sometimes it leads to tragedies there. Have we changed our way of operating as far as sending a technician, a mental health person to handle these problems instead of the police? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And obviously reading in the news and thinking through some of that, what's been in the news, and having limited understanding what's happening in Fresno with their review, and having small conversations with Chief Dino Larson. We haven't implemented any changes except for the fact we've increased staff that have come on board that go out and provide crisis response. But there has not been any changes on the mental health side for how those responses have occurred. I think the Sheriff.
So Supervisor Rodriguez, on the law enforcement side, there has been some changes in terms of policy and things. Obviously, when you write a policy, you try to make it as general as possible, but the overwhelming majority of circumstances that we encounter something where a crime has not been committed, but someone is in mental health crisis, we either get the workers that are funded through the CCP or other workers from Dennis's shop to assist us, or if it's a circumstance where no crime has been committed and the person is not a threat to someone else, we actually withdraw from many of those circumstances now, because there's no point in pushing a person into crisis and to having to make a decision that everyone ends up having to unravel afterwards. So there's a number of circumstances now that, say, 10 years ago, we would have went out with the whole SWAT team and surrounded the house and waited for the person to come out. If the person's in their home, they are not a threat to someone else. If they've broken off communication with the negotiator or with the deputies that are on site, we go away, frankly, because there's no point in pushing them into making a choice that they, if they were in their clear mind, they don't really want to make a choice on.
That's great news.
Right. Very good. Are there any other questions regarding this item from a supervisor? I'll now open this up to the public. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this item? If not, I'll entertain a motion for action.
Move to approve.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please. It was
Rodriguez, Supervisor Rodriguez, did you second?
Yes, I did.
okay. There you go.
Supervisor Wheeler,
Yes.
Supervisor Rodriguez,
Yes.
Supervisor Frazier,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Chairman Poitras.
Yes.
Vote approved 5-0.
Okay. Thank you.
We
8B.
didn't see your lips move, Max.
8B. Madera County Administration General Services, the Oakhurst Government Center update.
Good morning, Chairman and Board of Supervisors.
Good
Mary
morning.
Ann C., Special Projects Manager from Admin and General Services. Also with me today, Maritza Rodriguez, Project Manager for this project, the Oakhurst Government Center. And since there's a heavy IT component in our discussion, Brian Rohde from IT behind me. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. In 2008, your capital improvement plan adopted by the board suggested that a satellite government center in District 5 in Oakhurst specifically was in order. Estimated cost for construction at that time was $5,380,000. Today's dollars, the index estimates it at about 7.3 million. In lieu of new construction, however, your board approved acquisition of the St. Agnes Medical Facility on Junction Drive and State Route 49 for $1.8 million. And we closed on this property near the end of June of 2019. The funding for the building's acquisition was borrowed as one financing package using the main library as collateral, and included the tenant improvement projects at the Ranchos and Ag and UC Extension. After the acquisition was complete and the other two tenant improvements were mostly completed, it left a budget of $193,502 for tenant improvements at Oakhurst. The facility is in very good shape. It's 25 years old and offers the county several $1 million in savings for its acquisition and proposed tenant improvements. While it is in good condition, it's important to note that infrastructure improvements are needed. The bulk of the improvements that you're going to see in phases 1, 2, and 3 are all related to more about what's under the hood than what you're going to see. So the building as it stands is a very attractive building. When you come in, you're not going to see very many changes. So a lot of what you're going to see are infrastructure changes or under the hood kind of changes. The very first order of business we felt that was important was to move the building and fire shop from the old Bass Lake Courts. We didn't like having to pay utilities in 2 locations, and when we were notified that the tenants were going to vacate the property, we expedited that effort to complete the tenant improvements for building and fire. Office space for District 5, so supervisor and his chief of staff, water and natural resources, and public works was made available right about the time that COVID restrictions hit. The improvements in phase 1 include new exterior signage, demolition, construction, paint, flooring, temporary data network, some furniture, and obviously project management and exterior lighting. So this is a budget for essentially the phase 1 tenant improvements. You see at the very bottom that we have a balance moving forward to phase 2 of about $72,000. I don't know if you remember what the old signs look like, but we have finished the monument sign and the exterior signage for the facility. And here are just a few photos of the building and fire's new shop. It includes, again, new paint, carpet, casework, and there was some new wall construction and demolition there as well. Moving on to phase 2, sticking with that theme that the infrastructure improvements are the bulk of those improvements. We need to build out an IDF room that's capable of handling all the phases moving forward and allows for scalability for the future. In addition to the room's actual construction, dry fire suppression, a split HVAC unit, Cat 6 cabling throughout the facility, and Madera County's standardized IT equipment are recommended. Also in phase 2, a CASP inspection, which will illuminate what ADA improvements are needed. Those ADA improvements, HVAC and control system, interior lighting and signage, as well as fire alarm system. So, looking at the budget and looking at our available resources, we knew it was time to come forward and request transfer from general government diff in order to make phase 2 happen. You see with the carryover from the $72,000 remaining from phase 1, the request is $600,000, and I need to point out that those are cost estimates. We tried to be fairly conservative with those. The resources needed for phase 3 improvements will really be driven by the actual costs for phase 2 and estimates provided by a design team. While there are other potential funding sources in play, there may be a need for an additional request for government development impact to finish phase 3 and the remaining tenant improvements. Subvented departments, specifically the Department of Public Health and Department of Social Services, their use of these resources will be reimbursed via fully burdened lease rate. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Rohde, and I'll be back to the microphone, and Maritza, Brian, or I can answer any of your questions.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and supervisors on the line. Brian Rohde, Deputy CIO. The major dependency to get network connectivity into the Oak Cliff facility is a network line in which we're selecting VAST network to provide that. There are multiple ways to provide network connectivity into a facility. However, the reason we're selecting VAST is threefold. The first being it allows us to leverage the most modern security tools that we've invested within the remainder of the county. Number two, it upholds the standards that we have throughout the county, specifically at HHS here in the existing government center, and also the remainder of the Road 28 facility. The third is the VAST network solution allows us to scale. So in the future, if we decide to do network connect or perform compute functions that require additional network bandwidth, VAST allows us to expand and grow with the future of that particular facility. Ultimately, the cost of the VAST network is a one-time cost of $2,500 and an ongoing monthly cost of $1,650. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I got a question on that. Is that including Central Cows Communications?
Supervisor Rogers, no, it does not. That's a separate line item.
That is.
It is. The VAST network is just to get data into the facility itself.
Okay, and the other one is doing the cable and stuff in Central Cow?
That is correct.
Okay, I got it. I didn't quite understand that when I was reading it.
All right. Any other questions, or do you have one more presentation as part of this item, or is it open for questions now? Is that Mary Ann?
Essentially, yes. The recommendations on the table today are recommended from staff that $600,000 be transferred from general development impact fee to the project, and also approval of the VAST networks agreement. With that, we'll take any questions.
Very good. Any other questions?
Yeah. What is the status of the Bass Lake building?
So that's a great question. It's rather complicated answer. Maria? I'm going to call my colleague Maria Castro to the microphone to answer that. She's been dealing with that ball of yarn.
You mean our pregnant mama?
That's me. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Maria Castro, General Services. We are looking into selling off the Bass Lake Courts building. Unfortunately, it is a bit complicated. The Courts building is actually on one parcel with the Bass Lake Fire Station as well as a CRI ambulance trailer. So there's a joint use water system that goes to all the facilities. There's electrical work that goes to all facilities, and the court building essentially is the hub of that campus. So we're trying to kind of peel back all the layers to figure out what it will cost us to separate each of the buildings and separate the courts into its own individual parcels so we could sell it off. So we're working through that process now. gathering all the costs, and then we'll come back with a recommendation.
Okay. I just wanted to, one of the things that when we passed buying the new facility there in Oakhurst, that we would use some of that money when we could sell that. So I was just wanting to know what the status was. And I forgot about the water and electric and sewer and all that. Well, the sewer is the Bass Lake hookup. So that's very interesting on how we get that all separated. So the lot line adjustment would probably be pretty easy compared to all the rest of the stuff. So.
Do we at least, once we do all that work, do we at least have an estimate of value?
Not yet. So the courts have equity in that building based on the responsibility agreement we had with them. So we'll only get a portion of the sale proceeds. I haven't had an appraisal done on the property because I'm still trying to figure out the utility ties. So once I gather all of that information, we can actually have an appraisal done and get an idea of what we can actually sell the building for.
So do they have a percentage or a dollar
percentage.
equity?
Yeah, it's a percentage.
Okay. What's the percentage?
70%. Yeah, it's.
Did they get 70%?
They had the bulk of the building, correct. It was a 70-30 split.
Can we fight that some way? Can we get Borges and Bigelow to do something, to pass something to say, that's totally BS. They didn't pay for it. We paid for it, and how they can claim that like they did the one in downtown Madeira. It's just crazy.
Is this going a little bit outside this agenda item, or?
Sure. Just to finalize that question, staff can look into that with county council to see if that's something that's even approachable from a legislative standpoint.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions regarding this particular project?
I just want to thank the team for moving on this now. It's just been kind of frustrating. It seems like it's taking forever, but we're getting there now. I can see the end zone. So thank you, staff, all of you.
There you go. Well, I don't think it was any surprise that once we looked under the hood, as Mary Ann mentioned, that there was going to be a lot of dollars to be spent to bring things up to code and so forth, and to make it a useful building. But again, the overall cost, even with these improvements, are less than half of what a new construction would be.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad, not a bad addition.
And it's I think it would be even more savings if you were to build something that size in that location, would be even more. So I think it's a good project all around. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Very good. If there's no other questions from supervisors, are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this item? If not, I'll accept the motion for action.
Move to approve.
Second.
Let's have a roll call vote.
Supervisor Wheeler,
Yes.
Supervisor Frazier,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Supervisor Rodriguez,
Yes.
Chairman Poitras.
Yes.
Vote approved, 5-0.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank all of you so much. I can't thank you enough. Teamwork, that's all I can tell you.
Right. We have a public hearing that was scheduled at 10:30. It's now about 10:40, so let's move on to the public hearing item that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're on item 7A, which is a public hearing to consider the application of Randall Mathias for a rezone and tentative parcel map on that piece of property. My name is Matt Trieber. I'm the Chief of Development Services. With me that has a brief PowerPoint presentation is Kamara Biawoji with my Planning Division, and Kamara will now present this item.
Morning.
Morning.
Okay, so Kamar Biawogi, I'm the lead planner for parcel map 4268 and rezone 2020-003. This is a parcel map dividing 0.51 acres into two parcels, 0.15 acres and 0.36 acres. Also a rezone to RUS, residential urban single family. The proposed project is located on the west side of Nawazi, approximately 255 feet west of its intersection with Island 39050 Nawazi and Bass Lake. Once again, the applicant is requesting a tentative map to divide the 0.51 parcel or acre parcel into two parcels and a rezone from RMS, residential mountain single family, to RUS, residential urban single family. Mitigated negative declaration has been created for this project with specific concerns in aesthetics, cultural resources, utility, and service systems. As you can see here, the general plan is LDR. The general plan will remain the same as low-density residential. The zoning here is listed as RMS, residential mountain single family, and it will be rezoned to RUS, similar to the contiguous parcel. Here is a site or a tentative map showing the existing structures on a property and the division between on that parcel. Once again, this is going to be a rezone and a tentative parcel map dividing 0.51 acres into two parcels, 0.15 and 0.36. And then that rezone will be changing the zone from RMS, residential mountain single family, to RUS. The applicant has stated subsequent plans in converting the existing carport and garage to a single family structure on the newly formed smaller 0.15 acres. These are subsequent, no concrete plans. We'll be addressing that whenever they submit those plans. Planning Commission, they approved this item. We took this to staff September 1st, the parcel map 4268 and rezone 2020-003. Commission carried a vote 5-0 in favor of the project, recommending approval to the Board of Supervisors. And planning staff recommends approval for this item for the tentative map, parcel map 4268, rezone 2020-003, and then the mitigative monitoring report 2020-11. We are open for questions.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just one main point of clarification I just want to point out for the board and the public's consideration is there is nothing on this item that would permit the owner of this property to construct a house not in compliance with setbacks or height variance restrictions of that existing zone district as it is today, or the one that it goes to. I want to make that point. This doesn't somehow allow a 45-foot tall structure and 2-foot setbacks. They still have to adhere to all of the setback requirements, as do all of those properties in there. They could apply, certainly, at a later date for a setback variance, which is an additional public hearing process and an approval process. The board today, there is no action that would negate the requirement to construct this house in compliance with the zoning ordinance rules and restrictions as they are today. Just wanted to point that out.
Very good. Well, thank you.
So Matt, two questions. This is Tom. First one is, why are we changing the zoning from RMS to RUS?
Well, a couple things there, sir. The first off, the RMS zone district would not permit the tentative map of a 0.15 and a 0.36 acre parcel. The RUS permits the dividing of this property down to those small lot sizes. And it is in an urban area served with urban services.
I see. And there's already, those two houses are already on this property?
So currently, there is a single-family dwelling on the property, and then there is a carport existing. When a parcel is split, there will be this larger parcel will have the single-family dwelling, and then the smaller parcel will have just the carport remaining. That is the one that will possibly be reconstructed for a new single-family dwelling. The rezone is tied to this RUS, so that parcel essentially size could meet the size requirements, that RUS size requirements.
Okay, and right now, do they meet the setbacks on everything that those two buildings are right now?
Currently, yes. The larger parcel, there is a single-family dwelling. There was a setback variance back, I believe, in '97, and that was approved. But the current structure does comply, and the smaller parcel, the structures that are currently exist, do comply with those setbacks. And then once it's rezoned, those setbacks will actually give them a larger space to build, since the size setbacks will only be 3.5 as opposed to 5 feet.
Thank you, DeMar. You did a great job. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from supervisors? If not, this is a public hearing, and at this time, we'd like to hear from the public if there are any comments.
Move to approve.
Well,
if you close the public hearing.
Okay, well, we still have a lineup. We have 25 to 30 people lined up ready to comment on this.
Oh, we do? Okay.
Well, maybe one or two, but anyway. Yeah, we have some comments, so go ahead.
Okay. My name is Randall Matthias. My address is 497 West Bedford.
You can pull that over.
Thank you. West Bedford Avenue, Suite 105 in Fresno, California, 93711. Mr. Chair, members of the board, the Sanders family, I represent the Sanders family. They're the owners of the subject matter property. Kamara more than adequately gave you the background on this entitlement request of a rezone and a tentative map. Again, staff worked with us, and I want to thank them. The county has been wonderful to work through this process. I need to clarify one item, and that is the second structure was referred to as a carport. It's actually a combination carport, fully enclosed garage, second story level that's used for storage and whatnot. And again, I want to reiterate, we are not requesting any changes in setbacks or anything else other than what would normally be afforded to us when we come forward to build or otherwise renovate the second structure. We wouldn't be doing anything else that doesn't comply with county requirements. I'd appreciate all of your support on this project, and I also am available for questions and or comments. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes, we have another gentleman walking up that will be making a comment here shortly. Presumably.
My name is Eric Poppin. We're neighbors, the Saunders. Been there almost 20 years. And the reason I wanted to speak today is, I don't know if this image here is visible.
Can you have him speak into the mic more clearly? I
Certainly.
can't hear him.
No.
I didn't hear his name, Rob, or anything else because all it was just broken up.
Okay, maybe one more time.
Sure, let me start all over. My name is Eric Poppin. We've been neighbors of the Saunders for some 20 years now. We're coming up on 20 years. we own the property immediately adjacent to the Saunders, directly behind on Nawazi as well. This image that is being displayed right now is the view from my property, and the structure to the right there, the sort of barn-shaped roofing line, is the carport slash storage area that was described earlier. My only request is that I don't know if we can go to the next image. My only request is that the existing setback be retained. I know that's been discussed at some length already, but if we're measuring the front setback from Nawazi to what I've labeled there as the front of the property, then that would retain our view, and that's our primary concern. That's all I've got.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, very good. Thank you. Super. Are there
So-
any? Go ahead.
So Matt, on that question, if they do, when they present plans and they do want to expand the size of it, they would still have to have a public hearing before they could do it, right?
Yeah, so this is Kamara Bialogi, and yes, they're still going to have to go through the proper requirements, submit their plans to the building department. If the structure is impeding onto the setback variances, then we would have this setback variance meeting as a public hearing. It gets sent out to surrounding property owners, and we would have to follow all the procedures.
Right. So
And this is, Mr. Supervisor Wheeler, just a little bit further on that. So the setbacks that were just identified on that photo, I don't know if all the board members were able to see it, but the setbacks permitted in the RUS zone district, they have to maintain a 25-foot front setback, a 10-foot rear setback, and both side property lines at 3.5 feet, which that exhibit that was just shown did comply with those setbacks. If they were to encroach beyond that or closer, then that would trigger a full entitlement and a hearing process and rights to appeal and so on and so forth. So as it's
yeah, I just
today,
wanted to make sure Eric knew that. So I knew that, but I wanted to make sure he knew it, that he's covered with that. And if we vote for this today, then he still has a chance if they happen to do that.
All right. Very good. Any other questions from comments from the public? If not, we'll close the public hearing. And I'll
I have a
Move
question.
to it. Oh, you got a question,
I
somebody?
was just going to say, I'll
Yeah, I
take the
have-
motion for action. Oh, David? Okay.
Yeah, Matt, under the current setback, with the legal setbacks, the neighbor would still retain his view, am I correct?
according to, I think the exhibits that the neighbor just showed, yes, his view would be retained if they comply with the setback requirements of that zone district, yes.
Okay, so only if there was a variance from those legal setbacks, would there be a chance the neighbor's view would be encroached?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so I would say that is a good indicator
Right.
for the neighbor.
All right.
Okay.
So Supervisor Wheeler,
I
you have a
move-
motion, okay, for approval?
Yes, please, yes.
We have a second?
Yeah, I'll
Second. Oh, David can have it.
All right, very good. Roll call vote.
Supervisor Wheeler,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers,
Yes?
Supervisor Frazier,
Yes.
Supervisor Rodriguez,
Yes.
Chairman Poitras,
Yes.
vote adopted 5-0.
Very good, thank you. Item 6C, discussion and consideration of campaign contribution limits relating to Assembly Bill 571 and direction to county staff.
Good morning, Chairman Poitras. I'm going to kick this off, then I'm going to turn it over to Scott Cross from County Counsel's office. As the board may be aware, there was recent legislation passed and enacted in 2019. It's supposed to go into effect in January of 2021, affecting campaign contributions in local races. The background of this was that I believe the person who introduced it is going to term out of the assembly and is going to run for a local race, and miraculously we end up with Sacramento getting into the local business of local government of what our term limits, or excuse me, what our contribution limits should be.
Shocking.
When it comes to local campaigns. To my knowledge, we've had zero issues with this, and I'll let Scott explain the intricacies of this and explain the board letter as it's presented. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cross.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott Cross from the County Counsel's office. The staff report basically lays it out. What we have before you is this law, as Jay mentioned, goes into effect January 1. So there's certain campaign contribution limits that are already in place in the law for state elected officials. This bill, AB 571, makes those campaign contribution limits applicable to county and city offices, elective offices as well. However, it leaves the availability to counties and cities to adopt their own limits, which can be different than the limits set in the law. And it also allows for counties and cities to adopt their own limits, which would then be no limits. So I think, as Jay mentioned, currently, counties and city elected officials are not subject to campaign contribution limits. And so counties and cities, and I know some have already adopted no limit ordinances or resolutions, excuse me, and others have adopted limits that are different, either higher or lower than the state's limits. So again, another point, I guess, to consider is if you don't have anything in place by January 1, then automatically on January 1, the state's contribution limits would be applicable. However, you're not prevented from March next year or 2 years from now from still adopting your own limits. Just know that if you don't have anything in place by January 1, those limits would apply until and unless you adopt something different. Currently, those limits are $4,700 per election per individual contribution, and then that's set to go up January 1. It goes up by some factor every 2 years, every odd numbered year. So I think and anticipate it may go up a couple $100 or something like that, but the current limit is $4,700. So we're seeking
Scott, Scott.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, whatever.
Yes. Yes.
I just, it's another one of those things that the states are sticking their nose in our business again, our cities and counties. It's totally ridiculous. They can't balance nothing. They can't do nothing right, but they want to try to make us follow their inadequacies. And it just irks my rear that they think they can just go and do that. And reading all the backup last night, that number 2 is exactly what we should do. And I don't know, I'll let the other board members talk, but it's beyond me where they think they can just come in and start telling us what we do. Going to all the CSAC conferences, all the years that I've been going in, they even say, so many of the presenters, that if the state was run or the federal government run by the way counties are run, we would be so much better off. And I'm going to keep that in my mind always, whether I'm in office or not, because that I think is so important, that local control, and they're trying to take it away from us every little inch they can.
Well, and usually when any of those things are done, it's either self-serving for somebody up there that is trying to get somebody out or wants to keep themselves in. It has nothing to do with protecting the people. It's
absolutely.
It's generally a political deal. Just like the reason why there's term limits on the legislation up there is because that was the only way they were ever going to get rid of Willie Brown. and now you just have a revolving door up there, and number two I think is fine with me too.
I'm stunned at your cynicism. Mr. Barney.
I just wanted to remind the board that currently under our current system, we haven't had any issues with this. The FPPC does do adequate job, having been elected before, of monitoring, getting compliance, and getting people to play by the rules in place. And if we adopt a limit, which it sounds like the overwhelming majority of you do not want to, if we adopt a limit, that also puts a burden on your county to have to help monitor the contributions. So I'm heartened to hear that it sounds like so far that the majority of you would like staff to bring you back something that formalizes the bullet 2 within the board letter.
We can't vote on item 2 today. It's on the agenda.
Right, but it's not agendized. It's a choice. And
yeah, so the vote, Mr. Wheeler, would be to advise staff to bring back to you the proper ordinance to be considered, read, and approved or denied, just like with a regular ordinance.
Mr. Cross.
Yes, just to clarify on Jay's point is a good point to remind the board, if you do set a limit, either higher or lower, then you take it upon yourselves, the agency that sets a limit that's different than the state's limit would take it upon themselves to enforce that. Now, there is an ability to contract with FPPC for enforcement, but that's additional agreement, an additional layer. You set no limit, then there's no so-called enforcement. But I will point out, I think, to the public and to the board that it's still important to note that there's still the campaign disclosure requirements that you still need to comply with.
Right.
And also the normal PRA rules, the Public Reform Act rules for recusal and disqualification from certain decisions involving campaign donors would also still apply.
Okay. Very good. Are there any other comments from supervisors? If not,
Yes, I'd like to make.
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I've been in office 21 years in total, not in the county, but all of that time. But in all of my years of being in office, we've never had a single problem in Madera County with contributions. Even opponents of mine on the county level have come up with more money than I've come up with, generally speaking, to run against me. So those that want to make the argument that, well, you know, that limits the ability of other people to run against a sitting supervisor, that's baloney, because I've had opponents spend generally double and sometimes triple the amount of money that I've spent to run a campaign. Also, I think it infringes on the rights of the people to what they feel they would like to contribute, and I think limiting that is wrong. And I had another thought earlier, but I forgot what it was now. But I don't believe we've ever had an issue, not even one time, with this idea of limiting contributions. It only comes up when somebody wants to throw slings and arrows at another guy. So I think that, like what Brett said, it's self-serving and not serving the people.
All right, very good. Well, thank you. If there's no other comments from supervisors, are there any members of the public wishing to make a comment on this item? If not, I'll accept a motion for action.
Or is it just staff direction?
Direct staff to come back with an ordinance that reflects no contribution limit.
This should be item 2 that's on there. It pretty well explains
Right,
it. I
number
think.
2.
Just reference item 2 on as far as one of the options. Okay.
Right.
Do we have a consensus then, and then we get staff direction, and then we can bring something back, whether it's a resolution or an ordinance? We'll look into that, and then setting no campaign contribution limit, which is
okay.
Proposal number 2, I guess.
If everybody's good with that, Do we need to do a
Yep.
roll call, thumbs up, or, okay, we've got consensus. All right. Excellent. I don't hear anybody to the negative, so very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, 6D, health insurance benchmark.
Rob, real quick, I need to ask, this Jay or Scott said that had to be in place by January, whatever it was. Does we got time? Does the ordinance, can we do emergency deal with the ordinance going past
Well, we
a week or something? Otherwise, it takes 30 days, I thought.
Yeah, I think, again, we'll look into that. We have the ability to do a resolution. If we think we need to do an ordinance, we can do that. We could do an urgency ordinance. I'm not sure that it'd be necessary. But again, I think as I mentioned earlier, even if we get to, let's say the second reading is, I don't know when the meetings are, but January 10th, let's say, it may be a 10-day lag in there. Again, where if a supervisor or any other elected official was to receive a campaign contribution after January 1st, we may be subject to that limit for a short period of time. But we'll look into that. We'll try to get it in place or make sure that it is in place by January 1.
It's very important.
Thank you. All right. Michelle,
Good morning.
good morning.
I feel like it's been a while. Good morning, Chairman, members of the board.
It's kind of like, who are you?
And incognito with the mask. Michelle May reporting on behalf of Human Resources Office. So this particular item before you reflects our current contractual language with our bargaining units, allows for the county contribution to be made for health insurance based on the lowest cost HMO, excluding Kaiser. And so as with 2020, 2021 will also provide that plan to be Anthem HMO Select. Unfortunately, that particular plan does not offer coverage in Madera County and is very limited in Fresno County as well. So that obviously negatively impacts our Madera County employees, in particular those that live in Madera County. And so this particular item, based on your board's direction, Human Resources presented to our bargaining units the offer to continue the next lowest cost HMO that actually covers the Madera County employees as United Healthcare, which is our current contribution, to provide that that benchmark plan to continue for 2021. And so the item before you presents the side letters with all 13 bargaining units who were in agreement with that proposal, and then also extends the contribution based on that same benchmark plan of United to our unrepresented employees, including, of course, our department heads and elected officials.
Hey, very good. Thank you. Are there any questions of Michelle?
No, very good. So how many units did you say? 5?
All 13. We have agreement with all 13 here presented.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, hallelujah. Jeez.
Very good. Any other questions? Are there any members of the public wishing to comment on this item? If not, I'll bring it back for.
I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Supervisor Wheeler,
Yes.
Supervisor Frazier,
Yes.
Supervisor Rodriguez,
Yes.
Chairman Poitras.
Yes.
Vote passes 5-0.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank everybody.
Yes. Item 8, the GSA reports. We have be looking at some principles of allocation methodology and our agencies.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Stephanie and Agneson, your Director of Water and Natural Resources. I'm here with Mike Linden, Deputy County Counsel, and Greg Young, who's via WebEx to do this presentation. Ms. Pogue, would it be possible to share the screen? Thank you. So we have background, the legal framework, which Mike will cover. We'll talk through the water allocation concepts and then address some of the outstanding questions. So the graphs that you see in front of you show the ET. You can think of it as water use over time from 2010 through 2019. You can see that Madera uses the Madera subbasin. Madera County GSA is using the bulk of the water, followed by Chowchilla and just a smidge in the Delta Mendota. And on these graphs, the scale, the vertical scale is all the same, just so you can get a sense of the proportion. And then if we kind of zoom in to look at the trend line closer, what you can see is that both the Madera and the Chowchilla subbasins are showing the same upward trend in water use. And then there it is for the Delta Mendota. So we're showing you this to kind of establish the impetus for acting. And we do have the principles of an allocation to discuss in an informational way and then to come back to you December 15th. So now Mike is going to go through 2 legal slides, and then I will look at the principles of the allocation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mike Linden, Deputy County Counsel. We have just 2 slides here. Much of this we've gone over before, but there's a little bit of material towards the end that's kind of ties into what Mr. Agneson has presented and what Mr. Young will illustrate in his presentation. As for the background, yes, what Sigma allows our GSA to do is establish these extraction allocations, which are, as we described before, they're different than an overlying right. The overlying right is the basic groundwater right, and when we talk about the sustainable yield for the subbasin, that is what a person would generally have an overlying right to. What Sigma allows, and this is what we're going to discuss for the details today, is an extraction allocation that really is a legal privilege that's authorized by the legislature through Sigma for this GSA to give to an overlying rights holder. That is above and beyond what the overlying right is. Now, this is going to be ramped down over the Sigma 20-year period, but right now the allocations are going to be much beyond what someone has an overlying right to. Thank you. So, one thing about our allocation system, and like I said, the details will be presented by Mr. Young, is that it has to be consistent with our GSP, which is a basic tenet of Sigma. What we want to have with the GSP, what we have in our GSP, what we tell DWR is how we are going to avoid certain undesirable results. There are 6 of them in Sigma. 2 of them don't apply to us out here in the San Joaquin Valley and with our particular situation with the level of aquifers. So the 4 that are the most relevant are chronic lowering of groundwater, reduction of storage, subsidence, and then water quality degradation. So any allocation system that would be devised by any GSA would have to avoid undesirable results. And so certainly our system is designed to do just that. And so for that, Mr. Young will describe much more of the details.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through what our advisory committee saw last Thursday, and these slides are new. So I've highlighted the areas that were discussed. So in terms of principles for an allocation, the first thing growers want is some sense of certainty. So that's the first principle. We also talked through domestic water protection, and Madeline Harris, who is acting as an alternate on the advisory committee, added equitable access to safe drinking water. Principle C was fairness originally, and we've added and equity here. There was a discussion about this that was fairly involved at the advisory committee. I tend to think of fairness and equity as the same, but I did not want to Google this and read from the Oxford English Dictionary to the committee because that seemed rude. Flexibility is the fourth principle. You've heard from Deputy County Counsel Michael Linden on overlying groundwater rights protection. That's a key part of the allocation. Simplicity, which we aim for, but of course, if this truly were simple, it would be done. And then Jim Maxwell on the advisory committee added this last one, preserving the economic stability of Madera County and its citizens. So then the next principle is the water types. So in this, we've talked through what sustainable yield is. That's sustainable yield of native groundwater. That's water that exists in the subbasins from seepage and percolation. And then there's transitional water, which is our continued overdraft. So there weren't any comments from the advisory committee on this. The process we've talked through with you before, but this is essentially having people opt in for different water types at different points in the year. And then there's a payment that's tied to sustainable yield and transition water. And there was some discussion about that. We have an ongoing rate study, and we don't have the results of that right now. And I realize asking people to opt in for an unknown payment that feels pretty uncomfortable. But there would be financial ties to the amount of water that you're extracting. Farm unit zones also has been discussed at length with the advisory committee. What we did here is when we drafted a resolution for the advisory committee, we tried to put everything we agreed on into it. I am not sure there was agreement, at least from the advisory committee level, on exactly what went into a farm unit. So the language is broad here. And we've also amended some language about commonly operated lands, whether or not they are owned or whether or not they're owned and operated was discussed, and this is the more broad designation. And then the last principle is that there is monitoring. We had our first workshop on that 2 Fridays ago with very good attendance online. And there's a third-party vendor that will provide that monitoring for us. And then there's QA/QC done by a variety of people, including county staff, consultants, and the vendor who's doing the service. So those were kind of key principles that we talked about at the advisory committee and the thoughts and suggestions from them. This has gone extensively through workshop with the advisory committee. You can see this started back in May of 2019. We did put it on the back burner in order to get a GSP adopted, but we've worked on it since mid-summer. So you'll see on this slide, November 12th, we had a vote 9-1 to kind of conceptual approval of that allocation in a resolution. There was discussion about the quantity of demand reduction that was foreseen in the GSP. I don't think anyone is thrilled by that. Fairly extensive discussion of fairness and equity. And then at least the people who have voiced thoughts on farm unit zones are not necessarily in favor of any constraints on those. So there are 2 outstanding questions. I'll tackle the first one with Greg's help, and then Greg is going to walk you through the second one. So this is a map you haven't seen before, but we're showing it because the county-wide areas were more clear on the map if they were shown in color. So we actually have different zones for their allocation in which we would allow people to group their land. So within the Madera Subbasin, there were 3. There's one on the western side, and then on the eastern side of Madera County, there's 2 different zones, and they're broken up by the Fresno River. In the Chowchilla Subbasin, there's an east and a west, And then there is one little zone that is on the Delta Mendota. So these are all different subbasins. If you were within a farm unit zone, you would be able to group your land as a farm unit and manage your allocation within that. We think this in many ways mimics natural farm operations, but there are some constraints on this. And we did some modeling with David's Engineering and Ludorf and Scalmanini to come up with this. And what we modeled was essentially if you allowed people to sort of group their farm unit on the eastern and the western side of the subbasin, they could essentially shift their pumping to one area, most likely taking land out of production here and doing more pumping on the western side of the subbasin. And what we found was that there was an effect on groundwater levels. They declined significantly more. And there was also more water that was brought in from surrounding subbasins. And you'll recall from this time last year, we discussed all of our comment letters and we heard from everybody in surrounding subbasins that they were concerned about interbasin flows. So that is probably all I was going to say on farm unit zones. Greg, is there anything you would like to add before we go to the next part on the transitional water?
No, well, that was an excellent representation of it, Stephanie. I just want to add one thing again for people to consider, and that is that if we can pull that map back up, I would appreciate leaving that map up for a second. I don't know if that's...
It's up.
It's not up on my screen.
Okay, okay.
Is it up?
Please hold.
Yeah.
All right.
There we go.
Now?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And by the way, good morning, supervisors. I appreciate being here again in front of you and talking about this this challenging GSA need that we have for your consideration. But the one thing I wanted to add with the farm unit, as Stephanie was just suggesting, with folks potentially taking land out of production as an example in that eastern area, farm unit area in the Chowchilla Basin, and pumping in the western area, what essentially that would mean is that they would continue to pump or maybe pump more in the western area, which would continue the drawdown of groundwater levels, which is adverse to what the groundwater sustainability plan had identified, which would be a reduction in some consumptive use throughout all of the GSAs, such that the groundwater levels would start to stabilize and in some cases return to higher levels. So if the water use was just shifted, what it essentially means is that the gradient of lowering groundwater levels that you might have seen that was caused us to go in this direction would just continue and would exacerbate the problem. So that's part of the reason we need to address these farm units and have some limits, is so that we do have reductions occurring throughout the GSAs and the GSA areas, so that we have some ability to see groundwater levels start to stabilize and potentially even rebound. So that was all I wanted to add.
And I would just add that Greg and I have continued to have conversations with landowners about how this might affect their operations. One issue that's come up is sometimes people are on one side of the Madera subbasin line as well as the other side of the Chowchilla subbasin line. So that makes a lot of sense. That's the line it appears fairly arbitrary, right? It's in the DWR Bulletin 118, but it doesn't seem to have a geologic basis. So is there something where people could maybe group their land into one subbasin, at least for management purposes? That's one thing we've discussed. Also, there are people with operations on both sides of the Fresno River that would like some flexibility and maybe a buffer zone of a mile or so where they could group their land into one or the other subbasin, zone in the Madera subbasin. And I think Mike wanted to add one thing.
Thank you. Just to add one thing about the the principles that we put up there and we talked about with the advisory committee, and we made some additions and things. I don't know if there was possibly going to be any questions regarding, okay, what is the mission here? Well, one thing you need to keep in mind is a GSA has one particular statutorily authorized mission. It is to take care of matters that are required by SIGMA, and that is what we do. And so we have a GSP, we have to take care of that, by law. Otherwise, we have PWR. And so when it comes to meeting the different principles, any of them, whether it's economic or fairness and equity, how it ideally would work, and hopefully will work in our cases, if we do SIGMA correctly with our allocations and working with our GSP, all these things will be taken care of. And so just want to point that out from the standpoint of kind of tying our principles together with our mission under SIGMA.
Okay, and then we had one more outstanding issue, which relates to the annual transitional water determination, and then we wanted to take your feedback on our work so far so that we could bring you this item in December. So go ahead, Greg.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. So as we've presented and discussed before, the allocation approach has two types of water: the sustainable yield of native groundwater, which would be one bucket that the GSA distributes annually, and that number should be a fairly consistent total quantity available within each subbasin to be shared amongst the participants. And then the other bucket is considered transition water, and that is the water that we are going to start off with a higher quantity that might closely replicate current conditions, and then shrink that to zero over our 20-year implementation. So each year, the board will need to make an annual determination of the transition water available to each GSA and each subbasin. The quantity will need to follow the GSP's defined ramp down. And there's something on the screen now about Windows malicious software recovery tool.
I'm going to say no as the answer. Do you want to allow it access to the network? I'm going to go with no.
Yeah, probably safe.
It seems to
It's always something nowadays. Quantity, so the GSP has a defined ramp down as stated here. It says starting in 2020 and continuing through 2025, the average annual groundwater pumping will be reduced by 2% of the total demand reduction amount per year, for a total cumulative reduction of 10% by 2025. And then groundwater pumping will be reduced by 6% per year starting in 2026 and continuing through 2040. So if we think about this, this is a way to get 100% of that transition water quantity to 0% of that transition water quantity. And each year, there'll be a little bit less. So if we think about, let's start with 100 units in year one. Year two, we would have 98 units available to distribute. Year three, 96, et cetera, to where we ultimately in year 20 have 0 units to distribute out of that initial transition water bucket. So that is the concept here. Is what so following what the GSP stated. So the transition determination, we do have some discretion within the GSA board for establishing that initial quantity, where that initial transition water is really the total evapotranspiration of applied water. That's how much is being consumed minus the estimated sustainable yield. So there's two options. We have at least two options. One is we have that total ETAW equivalent to what was used and discussed in the groundwater sustainability plan, and that was using a 2015 land use basis. And option two was the total of ETAW as approximately currently represented in each of the GSAs and each of the subbasins for the county GSAs. So regardless of that initial transition water number, though, again, that quantity will start being reduced annually by 2% and then 6% increments. So whether we start at 100 units or whether we start at 140 units, that each of those sizes would be reduced by 2% of that particular starting point to get to zero. So again, the same endpoint of zero is reached by 2040, and the annual transition water quantity will be distributed based on the allocation process that we've discussed before. So we're going to walk through a couple of examples to help you understand what that kind of means on these options. So first off, here is a current picture of the approximate evapotranspiration of applied water in the Madera subbasin. The orange bars we see here represent, and you see them varying some, that represents the ET of applied water, and the difference in the kind of the gray, light blue lines is the amount of evapotranspiration from the agricultural cropped areas that resulted from effective rainfall. So we know rainfall varies each year, so the result of, and varies by quantity and timing, and how that relates to the irrigation demands and the use by the various crops. So we see a fluctuation, but again, the overall trend is upward. Next slide. So what we see here is first one representation of 2020 kind of already in place, and then the next years out to the 2040 period where this transition water, which is kind of the lighter color on top, is getting smaller and smaller to zero. The green bars is the approximate quantity of sustainable yield available to this particular subbasin. Again, this is the Madera County GSA and the Madera subbasin. It's about 90,000 acre feet of sustainable yield. Go ahead and click one time. This particular starting point is approximately the ETAW, so the evapotranspiration of applied water from the GSP. You see that kind of correlates to this period of 2014, 2015, roughly. So that's one place. One of the options is we can start there, and that transition water bucket would be essentially that differential, and we'll look at some numbers in a moment here, compared to the sustainable yield. So go ahead and click the next animation. So now what you see here is this is the increment of where the current ET approximates to. And so there's a little bit of a difference here, but yet we still get to zero by 2040. So the annual increment gets is a little bit of a bigger step each time, but it's still on a 2% and 6% basis. So this question of, you can see this little difference here of the current, the ETAW compared to the ETAW from the groundwater sustainability plan is about 18,000 acre feet a year, roughly in the Madera subbasin, Madera County GSA and the Madera subbasin. So next animation. So we can look at it two ways. The first 5 years at 10%, if we use the GSP's value, so that starting point that does not include that extra increment on top. So we'd be starting at about 190,000 acre feet. We would reduce 2,000 acre feet of that transition water bucket each year for the first 5 years, and then bump to about 6,000 acre feet. If we use the higher starting point from the current condition, that annual increment for the first 5 years increases slightly, and so does the 6% increment. So you essentially have a little bit bigger step each year downward to still get to zero. We have also done the same representation for the Chowchilla subbasin and the Delta Mendota, so we could walk through those quickly, or we could pause here to ask any questions about this and then understand the applicability to.
Yeah, I've got a question, Greg. So these were this with the sustainable yield plus the transitional water is based on actual data from what it took to grow the crops in Madera County before Sigma. Is that correct?
So what, let me see if make sure I'm understanding. So on the left part of our graphic here, the 2010 through 2019 data is the remote sensed estimate of the actual consumptive use for all the crops in the Madera County GSA and the Madera subbasin. As those crops have changed over time, we're getting some different cropping patterns, we're getting some maturity of some different crops. We've seen that before as represented in the GSP itself. There's been more permanent crops planted and more idle land that has become actively farmed. And so
Okay,
that
but-
results in this number. Is that what you're asking, Brett?
That is what I'm asking, and so I appreciate that. And that, but it's not like Sigma during that from that time to now that it wasn't presupposed that it was going to be there. So they planted those crops with the understanding that this was going to be coming down the pipe. But so at that point in time, with where the crops were, the amount of water that was being used would be this sustainable yield plus the transitional water. So when we break that up per parcel, it's at this point in time, it would have been what it was to grow or what the use of water was in 2015.
Yes. Again, noting that the allocation approach is going to take these buckets of water, the sustainable yield bucket of about 90,000, and then the transition water bucket, which would either be maybe 100,000 more or 110,000 or 118,000 more, and would distribute that based on the parties that opt in.
Right.
So I don't know if that fully gets it.
Yeah, that answers the question. But I was just showing that it would have been the same as in like it has to be spread out amongst everybody. Some people were maybe using more, some people were using less in 2015, but now they get their equitable share of what it would have been available or what would have been used without Sigma in 2015. So I just need that as to know when talking with people. And so they would get their sustainable yield, and then they would have to ask for their portion of transitional water or request that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the way we have talked about this allocation approach is that folks would opt in through an initial opt-in process that would result in some availability of sustainable yield, and then there would be an opportunity to request water out of this transition water bucket. Some parties may need or may want more out of that transition water bucket, and some parties may want less. And so we're trying not to say that that results in the same distribution of that transition water bucket.
So it's whatever they request for their crop, and if all of it isn't taken up in the first round, it would go back out for a second round for people to request more. Is that correct?
Right. So the opportunity from the way we're looking at this is a farm unit basis, and then based on the cropping decisions, you may have, you would likely have certain lands with ultimately a little bit more allocation to match the cropping needs that they may have initially. And the need to start to reduce again is going to catch up with everybody quickly at some point as you shrink this transition water bucket.
Yeah, and hopefully at a 2% glide path, hopefully there can be some advancements in technology to be able to meet those 2% reductions each year until you get down to the, but that's, hoping it's not there yet, but good, that's all I need to know. And then I would imagine that in the next few slides, there will be something in regards to what happens if the person, if they don't opt in. I have a question, what happens with that? And two, what happens if they go over the allotment? I would imagine they're in the next slide, and if not, I'd like to have those questions answered.
Craig, I have some questions that Brett just mentioned. My concern, the graphs look good and all that. If everybody was very cooperative, that would be great. What type of enforcement do you have to make sure that in this case, the farmers do what they have to do?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Supervisor Rodriguez. Stephanie, did you want me to take that first, or did you want to answer that?
Sure, let me take a shot at it. I mean, we do, as a groundwater sustainability agency, have the ability to do enforcement, and we do have the ability to fine. I would imagine the fines would probably dissuade most people. But go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I think
on the fine.
Yeah, the size of the stick and the size of the carrot, right? So I think that part of what we're wanting to be working towards is, especially in this next year, is using that as an education year to really understand water budgets, where people are going to be in comparison to what they thought they might be, where that if there were to be needed fines or other things, how we may need to address those questions to try and help incentivize the correct directional movement. It is a heavy lift. I think that, the thing that Stephanie noted earlier in the discussion with the advisory committee, there's a lot of demand reduction. That differential down to that green bar that we see in this graph, that's a significant amount of reduced consumptive use of water that is going to change the landscape, the agricultural landscape in these GSA regions. And so there is a lot to do, and it's going to be, we're going to need to be able to be adaptive on some of these things as far as how we address that to assure we are following this ramp down. And I think the main point of this slide and walking through this kind of question is whether you allow the initial transition water bucket to, in this case, essentially be greater than 200,000 acre feet, or do you shrink it back to something that was akin to the 2015 timeframe and immediately remove some additional water from the transition water bucket? I think that's really kind of the question that this slide is raising for consideration by the GSA board. And then either way, these steps are going to need to be enforced regardless of our starting point to assure that we're getting participation, to assure that we are incentivizing the demand reduction that we need to see.
Stephanie, I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One, in the advisory, was there any discussion about a specific time frame? In other words, moving back for land that was put in production previous to the inaction of the GSA law. I'm just curious as to was there any discussion in that regards, because I know there was a rush to go out and purchase land and put it in production, especially on the east side, which really irritates me that someone's trying to make the connection with east side land and west side land, because the production of those lands is completely different. Then also a second question I'll address after you answer that one.
Sure. So the advisory committee did not specifically address that question, though I have heard that discussed kind of widely. The Madera Ag Water Associations discussed it. And yeah, I mean, I think, whatever the rules are, people try to find ways to maximize their own needs within them. And so it does appear that there was a lot more land that was put into production or that shifted from lower water using crops to higher. So that was not specifically discussed, Supervisor.
What are your feelings in regards to trying to go back to a point in time in regards to the Groundwater Sustainability Act and address that, where people have tried to circumvent what was going to happen and put land in production knowing that this was coming? I just get the feeling there should be some kind of an action in that direction, but I'm not real sure.
So I would venture to say that if your board can adopt a resolution with an allocation in December, that there will be natural consequences to people who planted fairly recently. And that one of them is going to be that they're not going to have a ton of water for the life of their crop. They may be fine for the next couple of years, but not later.
So you feel it'll be a natural occurrence then?
Yes, and yes, that's a personal thing, but we have discussed this amongst ourselves, staff and consultants, and it is hard to figure out what year you would consider everybody properly notified that this was a thing and that they should not put in any additional crops.
I would say a year. I would say a year after the GSA was passed, everybody knew about it. If you're in the ag industry and you didn't know about the GSA at that time, you're really blind.
Well, yeah.
But anyway, my second point in this thing too, my second question, this disproportionately affects dairies probably more than anybody else. You can't reduce the watering of cattle. You just can't do that. But is any consideration being given to proximity properties where they can offset their water needs by utilizing the water that would be allocated to another property? I mean, that's happening anyway through your planning, but are they able to reach out further?
Yes, I think what you're suggesting is essentially a water market. We do have that grant to develop it and a workshop coming up on December 1st for a simulation next year. So that would give more flexibility, but you are absolutely correct about dairies. They tend to be right-sized without an easy way of decreasing their size and their water use. And that
yeah, there comes a point at which they have a reduction in profit to the point where it's no longer profitable, and they'll cease to exist. And of course, I think that is very punitive in these circumstances. I wish we had a way to make that happen better.
All right. Thank you. Are there any other comments? And not, Stephanie, you have a couple other sub-basins to talk about.
I think all of the comments you've made are applicable to the Chowchilla and the Delta Mendota, but if there was any additional feedback on the farm unit zones or on the transitional water, whether you'd like to look at current ET and do 2% based on that amount, which is a bigger chunk of water than using the original ET from the GSP. We were open to that feedback, and then we'll draft a resolution with Mike.
Okay, very good. I'd like to weigh in a little bit. First of all, I would be fully in support of the using the water measurements from 2015 rather than 2020. Supervisor Rogers alluded to folks, who went out between 2015 and 2020 and planted new orchards and expanded and so forth. And really, anybody in the world of agriculture that is aware of what's going on in agriculture and is aware of their operation would have known, if they're in a county area, not a district or something, that they're going to have issues. And it would be unbelievable to hear from somebody who is a successful farmer in a farming operation to act like they had no clue. I'm in the agricultural business. I was not active. My brother is actively overseeing things. Now I am. And we were fully aware back in 2014 of what was going on. And so for somebody to say, and a lot of these farming operations, I would say, are a lot more sophisticated than ours. And somehow we got that information. I don't know how, but we got it. Maybe it was a email or it was on Facebook or something. So that excuse doesn't hold water with me at all. Second of all, and so because of that, to say that we're going to go to this new measurement of what was going on in 2020, it again, it's making a mockery, in my viewpoint, of the entire system and what Sigma's supposed to do. We need to balance or become sustainable as far as a water basin. And so rather than pushing the envelope and increasing it and saying, oh, we just want a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, we need to take a firm stand. I love these principles that are here. We're talking about domestic well protection. And if we continue to push and say, oh, well, okay, let's just use this higher number, then we're going to have more issues, especially in the, I guess, the northern, the Fairmead, that particular area, the county, Madera Acres, places like that. We're going to have water issues. Fairness and equity. I think people look at this fairness and equity and they immediately think of household and single-family residences, which is good, but you also have to think of fairness and equity to those responsible agricultural operations who have been playing by the rules and overexpanding in areas that you're going to overexpand. I love flexibility because it's going to give us the flexibility to put limits, more restrictive limits on groundwater pumping. And preserving the economic stability of Madera County and its citizens, absolutely. Because if we don't do something about this and do it quickly and be more aggressive as far as the reduction of pumping, we are going to be putting the economic stability of Madera County and its citizens, everybody in this county, whether it's industry, manufacturing, residents of the city of Madera, residents of the city of Chowchilla, other agriculture, we're going to be being very punitive in our treatment of them. So absolutely. So these are wonderful principles. You look at 2010, we were pumping a little over 200,000 acre feet. And now in 2020, it's a little under 250,000 acre feet, according to this chart. 2015, we're at 225,000 acre feet. So it's like it's getting worse. It's not getting better. For us to lighten the load as far as the restrictions, again, I think it would be doing a disservice to all of the citizens of Madera County, to agriculture, and to our residents. So those are my comments currently, and I think that again we need to. It's almost like I'd love to see those numbers flip. Maybe the later years at 2% a year for the last 5 years, and in the front 6%. But we're not there yet. We're probably going to have to make some adjustments. But again, and we're looking at this year, it's going to be very, very dry. I haven't seen much rainfall. They're talking about 30% tomorrow, but who knows what that is? Probably just a dusting. And we need to be aware of those things. So otherwise, you're going to be seeing the pump companies out running all over the place, dropping wells. I guess it's good for their business, but it's not good for agriculture in Madera County. So those are my comments right now.
I agree, Rob. And the only way that I could see using 2020 numbers is if it's like it was supposed to be, which would have been 2% less than 2015. But other than that, I think we'll just stick with 2015.
Right. Thank you. Any other comments from supervisors before we open it up to the public?
Totally in agreement. I'd like to say ditto to everything you said. And the fact that we are at least 20% more this year than we were in 2010 is a disgrace. Knowing everything that was coming down the pike, that we went out and increased production, that's a disgrace on those who did that. And we need to address that.
Right. Very good. If there's no other comments from the supervisors, are there any members of the public wishing to comment?
I'm just going to say, Rob, Tom, I'm sorry. I agree with you guys 100%. You know, we've been talking about this so long, Max and I especially, and I just can't. Thank you, Rob. That's all I can say.
All right. Thank you, Supervisor. Let me see. We have somebody standing, and then I think.
Mr. Chairman, may I add something?
Yes.
Okay. You know what Tom just mentioned, you know, and I think you've all heard us before, and I'll repeat myself, and we just have to, the word is moratorium, and it's bad. It doesn't sound good, but apparently this is the only way we're going to be able to get out of this problem. And it is a problem, and it's going to get greater, like we're all realizing. But it's best that we do something. We have to do something almost to the point of being drastic. And that word, I can't forget it, because this is what we have to do in the Central Valley. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Supervisor. Are there any members of the public wishing to make comment?
Almost good afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you for having me today. It's Christina Beckstead with the Madera County Farm Bureau. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Stephanie for all of her hard work and efforts on this. I know it's been a very daunting task, and you're dealing with a lot of very difficult people. A couple of general comments, as Farm Bureau hasn't taken a position or had much discussion on these principles, and information that's gone out regarding allocation, although we do intend to have that discussion. A couple of comments that I'd like to make specifically to that, just generalized, is that there have been a lot of phone calls since this has been released, so I've gotten a lot of calls from growers, and I wanted to share a common theme that has come out of that, and is credits and a market system and that type of thing. And as we discuss allocations, we just want to emphasize that the board take into consideration and think about not removing any tools out of the toolbox, and making sure that there are plenty of tools for growers to work with. I know that there is a grant underway on the possible market system, or maybe some sort of a credit system, and we just want to make sure that like I said, all of the tools are in the toolbox, and that we make sure we explore those things fully and not eliminate anything prematurely. As far as the allocation goes, the details regarding the allocation are critical. We need to make sure that the system does work well. So oftentimes that might be starting simple and then expanding upon it. So something to keep in mind, because if we overcomplicate the system from the beginning, it may just fail, unfortunately. A couple of comments based on supervisor's comments today that I would like to chime in on. Supervisor Poitras, I agree with your sentiments throughout all of this. However, I will remind the board that unfortunately for the agriculture industry, it has been a never-ending roll of red tape for growers, more so in the last 5 to 10 years. And although we would anticipate that all growers should probably know what's going on, they don't. Because ultimately, just like you and me, we see something that we don't like and we tend to brush it under the rug. And as you continue to get it, you know that you eventually have to face it. But as it continues to roll out, you try to figure out where to hone in and focus your efforts. And some growers, it took them a few years to figure that out. And even today, I think Stephanie can speak to this, that there are still some people out there that have no idea what Sigma is and what it entails. And it's very unfortunate, because trust me, there are plenty of us out there that are doing our best to get this information out. But it is, unfortunately, that is what we're dealing with. As far as the east side land development, to some of Supervisor Rogers' comments, I will also remind this board that it may have not been this board, but agriculture development isn't the only development that has occurred on the east side. And as we move forward, I would think that all of these future decisions that come through here, all of this will be taken under consideration
not only just ag. And I'm not going to say that ag hasn't acknowledged that there have been some things that probably shouldn't have happened, but it's not just the ag industry. And so we need to make sure that it's kind of a fair playing field across the board as we move forward and implement these new strategies. As far as a moratorium goes, I think this board has addressed that before my time, and it was not a pretty discussion. I will remind the board that agriculture is the number one industry in Madera County. And although there are some numbers being thrown around that says that it's not a significant portion of the budget in Madera County, a lot of people's livelihoods, whether the money is spent in Madera County or somewhere else that live in Madera County, are impacted by whatever decisions are made today. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public wishing to address the board?
Good morning or good afternoon now, supervisors. This is Madeline Harris from Leadership Council. I just want to thank you all first and foremost for your comments. I know that a lot of the people that we work with in Madera County really agree with some of the frustrations that you expressed, and some of the sentiments that you expressed with regards to how we need to really work at demand reduction so that there aren't additional impacts to drinking water. So we're really glad that, this allocations framework has a chance to move forward, and really appreciate your consideration of formalizing something next month. We think it's an important step towards demand reduction that really needs to happen in order to ensure compliance with SGMA. And we're supportive of an allocations framework that will be fair to all people and will prevent localized hotspots of over-extraction. And we believe that preventing localized hotspots is a really important step towards protecting drinking water around, possible over-pumping sources. And I want to thank Stephanie for, going way out of her way to do an additional meeting to get input from organizations that work with small farmers. I know that this board has, talked about concern for small farmers in the past, so I really appreciate her, seeking out that input on an ongoing basis. So we hope to be able to, meet with you and provide additional feedback that we've heard from the community about how allocations could work before December. I'd be more than happy to share, more feedback that I've heard about how the enforcement side might work from people that we work with who, not only rely on small water systems, but also are farm workers and are working in the ag industry and have that expertise as well. So just thanks so much. And again, appreciate all the comments that you all shared.
Very good. Thank you, Madeline. Any other comments from the public? If not, Stephanie, you heard a lot today. Do you need to get any clarification in terms of the item next month, or?
No, I think we're good to draft a board letter and a resolution, and Mike Linden will help with that. We appreciate all of the feedback. It was very helpful.
All right, thank you, and thank you for all your hard work. And I listened into the GSA meeting, and I know there's a lot of good discussion and so forth, but it's a heavy lift, and thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Moving to item number 9, pending legislation. Pending legislation anybody wants to talk about?
We covered 8A.
Oh, 8A, okay.
8B that goes along with it.
I'm sorry, 8B. It looked
Thanks.
like it was all together, but it's not. Okay, so let's go to 8B.
I'm really sorry. So in addition to the allocation, we just want to make sure that everybody knows we are working on a few items, including a rate study, having a data management system. We just had a meeting with the Bureau of Reclamation yesterday to discuss our CBP contract and our place of use expansion. We have an upcoming water market workshop. We just had a workshop on satellite technology with AeroWatch. We've received over 100 parcels that are willing to do recharge, who filled out our recharge study. We're planning a workshop in January on land easements and resting and retirement. And then we have a couple of Prop 68 things that are in process, a domestic will inventory in the Chowchilla Subbasin. We're working on the grant agreement for the Madera Subbasin and just released an RFP. And then Tristan and I are working on a Prop 68 grant. There is money available for recharge projects, so we're trying to figure out what will work in the Madera and Chowchilla Subbasins. It's I think 2 to 5 million per subbasin, so it's a lot of money. And then, of course, we're also your flood control agency. That's it.
So you've got
There's nothing
one or
going
two
on.
things going on. Yeah, exactly. No, that's great. It's all very related. I mean, at one point, the flooding and other issues weren't considered. They were considered to be very different types of things, but it really all it all ties into recharge and our GSP.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, it's all got water in it.
Exactly. Any comments on this item from the public? If not, thank you. Okay. We do have a IHSS meeting at 1:30, just to remind everybody. Any pending legislation? Supervisor reports. I'll start with Supervisor Frazier, since you're the one that I see right now.
Yeah, I already talked about my coffee and conversation. I think that's about it.
Okay.
I got my SJJPA meeting this Friday as well.
Excellent. Thank you for your work on that. Supervisor Rodriguez.
Well, I pick up the paper and watch TV, and the virus is getting worse and worse and worse. And we have a tendency to blame the governors, but I believe they're doing what they have to do, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't matter. There's things that we have to do. We have to abide to take care of our people. So hopefully, and everybody says it, but we all have to take the safeguards of being careful. Now we have Thanksgiving coming up, and it's going to create a problem because we have a tendency to gather to enjoy the holidays. So hopefully you'll be careful, very careful, and hopefully we can get through it with a drop in infections. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Rogers.
Yes, I have nothing to report.
Okay. Supervisor Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you. I had a couple of events. Saturday, the Karen Vets had a dedication at their memorial at the Course Code Historic Corner there. They put up a new banner celebrating first responders, firefighters, COPs, the sheriff department, the police. It was just really great, and so it was a good event, and that's there forever. And then Camarina Health had their food drive Thursday in Oakhurst, and then Friday in Madera. And it was, for the first time, I thought it was pretty successful with a lot of booths, and you had to just drive through. We drove up, they took the food right out of my hands almost, and Camarina Health did. So Camarina Health has just stepped up to the plate for so many different things in our community and the whole Madera County. It's just unbelievable. So I just wanted to thank them.
Very good. Well, thank you. Those are great comments. Mr. Varney.
There was two of the supervisors, a supervisor-elect, and a number of your other county staff attended the Veterans Day service that was in Courthouse Park. That was very nice. It was good to be outside. Everybody did a good job of staying away from each other. I have emailed out the most recent, that would be from yesterday, CDPH masking guidelines that came down. There's a couple of minor changes in there. I would just suggest that you read them. Basically, it says, you're out of your house, you should wear a mask, but there are some exceptions. One of those being if you're outdoors and you're not around people who are not strangers, then you're supposed to have your mask with you, but you don't have to have it on. So if you see people out and about with family members, don't immediately go to why aren't they wearing a mask. They may be following the guidelines because those may be close associates or family members. And then the sheriff isn't here, but due to the COVID, there's not going to be an academy graduation for this current class. However, they're doing a swearing-in ceremony this afternoon over at the courthouse for immediate family members, a few of the staff, and of course for the graduates. So that's pretty exciting because I think that's a pretty large class. There's somewhere between 6 and 9 new deputy sheriffs in there. So if you see some new folks around in uniform, introduce yourself because you won't know them and they certainly won't know who you are. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Hopefully they don't know us professionally, or something.
Yeah, hopefully it's just a friendly face-to-face greeting.
Here you go. Well, very good. No, that's always exciting to hear about more law enforcement being added on and academy graduates. So thanks for that report. Mr. Cross. All right, clerk of the board.
Nothing to report, thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you, everybody, and we will get back together again at 1:30. So have a great afternoon, and see you later.
Are we using the same sign-in?
Yes.
Same sign-in.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, for everything.
I think, is there a different one for the closed session, though?
There is.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rob, for running everything.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My pleasure.